I never expected a brewery tour to end with me pressed against oak barrels, his hands exploring every inch of my body while the scent of hops and malt filled the air around us. But Xavier had a way of making even the most innocent afternoon turn into something unforgettable. His fingers traced along my spine as I arched against him, the cool wood contrasting with the heat radiating between us. "You taste better than any brew I've ever made," he whispered against my neck, his breath sending shivers through me. I gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer, already knowing this was just the beginning of what would be the most intoxicating night of my life. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready for something. That'll leave you breathless. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I'd come to Milwaukee for work, nothing more than a freelance blogging assignment about craft breweries. The city's brewing scene was legendary, and I figured I'd knock out some content, drink decent beer, and head home. Simple, professional, boring if I'm being honest. But the moment I walked into Copper and Grain Brewing and saw Xavier behind the bar, something shifted in the air. Or maybe it was just the way he looked at me, like he could see straight through my carefully constructed professional facade. He wasn't what I expected from a brewery owner. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they could craft more than just perfect beer. His dark hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his fingers through it, and when he smiled, something warm unfurled in my stomach that had nothing to do with alcohol. "You must be Sienna," he said, extending his hand. The moment our palms touched, I felt it, that electric spark that makes your breath catch and your pulse quicken. His grip lingered just a beat longer than necessary, his thumb brushing against my knuckles. "Ready for the full experience?" I managed a smile, hoping I looked more composed than I felt. "That's what I'm here for." The tour started innocently enough. Xavier led me through the brewery with the kind of passion that made every word sound like foreplay. He talked about grain bills and fermentation temperatures, but the way his hands moved as he explained each process, the way his eyes lit up when he described his craft, it was mesmerizing. I found myself watching his mouth more, then listening to his words, imagining what those lips might feel like against mine. "Want to try something special?" he asked, leading me to a small tasting room I hadn't noticed before. The space was intimate, dimly lit, with exposed brick walls and a single table set for two. "This isn't part of the regular tour," he poured samples of beer I'd never tasted, each one more complex than the last. But somewhere between the Imperial Stout and the barrel-aged porter, the conversation shifted from professional to personal. He told me about starting the brewery, about long nights perfecting recipes, about the satisfaction of creating something with his hands. I found myself leaning closer, drawn in by the passion in his voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. "What? About you?" he asked, refilling my glass. "What drives you?" I should have given him the standard answer about loving to write, about exploring new places. Instead, I found myself being honest in a way that surprised me. "I'm always searching for something real," I said, "something that makes me feel alive." His gaze held mine steady and intense. "And have you found it?" The question hung between us, loaded with possibility. I took a sip of beer, buying time, but my answer came out anyway. "I'm starting to think I might have." The air between us shifted, charged with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Xavier stood, moving around the table to where I sat. He didn't say anything, just reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering against my cheek. "Sienna," he said, my name sounding different in his voice, deeper, rougher. I stood too, the space between us shrinking to nothing. "Yes?" Instead of answering, he kissed me. Soft at first, tentative, giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't want to pull away. I wanted to sink into him, to taste the beer on his lips, to feel the solid warmth of his body against mine. My hands found his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath my palms. The kiss deepened, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me closer until I could feel every inch of him. He tasted like the bourbon barrel stout we'd been sharing, rich and complex, with an edge that made me want more. My fingers tangled in his hair, and I heard him groan softly against my mouth. "We should probably," I started to say, some small part of my brain trying to be rational. "Should what?" he murmured, his lips trailing along my jaw, finding that sensitive spot just below my ear that made my knees weak. I couldn't finish the thought. Rational had left the building the moment he touched me. "Nothing," I breathed. "Don't stop." His hands slid down my back, settling at my waist, his thumbs tracing small circles through the fabric of my dress. Every touch sent heat spiraling through me, making it hard to think about anything except the way he was making me feel. I pressed closer, my body fitting against his like we'd been made for this moment. "Come with me," he said, his voice rough, with want. He led me through a door I hadn't noticed, into what looked like his private office. The space was small, masculine, with a leather couch pushed against one wall and brewing equipment scattered across a large desk. But I barely had time to take in the details before his mouth was on mine again, more urgent this time, more demanding. My back hit the door as he pressed against me, his body pinning me in place in the most delicious way. His hands found the hem of my dress, fingers skimming along my thighs, higher, until I gasped against his lips. The sound seemed to unleash something in him, and suddenly his touch became more confident, more purposeful. "Tell me you want this," he said, his forehead resting against mine, his breathing ragged. "I want this," I whispered, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. "I want you." That was all the permission he needed. His hands were everywhere, mapping the contours of my body through the thin fabric of my dress, finding all the places that made me arch against him. When his lips followed the path his hands had traced, kissing along my collarbone, down to the valley between my silhouette, I thought I might come apart right there. He lifted me easily, carrying me to the couch, laying me down with a gentleness that contrasted with the hunger in his eyes. The leather was cool against my heated skin as he knelt beside me, his gaze drinking me in like I was something precious. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers found the zipper of my dress, sliding it down slowly, giving me time to change my mind. But I didn't want to change my mind. I wanted to lose myself in this moment. In him. In the way he was looking at me like I was everything he'd ever wanted. The dress pooled on the floor, followed by the rest of our clothes, until there was nothing between us but desire and the charged air of the small room. He explored my body with the same attention to detail he'd shown when talking about his brewing process, learning what made me gasp, what made me arch against him, what made me whisper his name like a prayer. When his mouth found the center of my warmth, I nearly came undone. His tongue moved against me with expert precision, building pressure until I was trembling, my fingers tangled in his hair, holding him against me as wave after wave of sensation crashed over me. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, but he seemed to sense my struggle. "Let me hear you," he murmured against my skin. "No one's here but us." So I did. I let him hear every gasp, every moan, every breathless plea for more, and he gave me more, his fingers joining his mouth, stretching me, preparing me, until I was writhing beneath him, desperate for everything he could give. When he finally moved, over me, positioning himself between my thighs, I was ready, more than ready. I was aching for him, for this connection that felt like it had been building since the moment we met. He entered me slowly, giving me time to adjust to his size, his eyes never leaving mine. The feeling was overwhelming. Fullness, completion, rightness that made everything else fade away. For a moment we just stayed like that, joined, breathing each other's air, letting the significance of the moment settle over us. Then he began to move, and rational thought became impossible. Each thrust sent sparks through my body, building heat that pooled low in my belly and spread outward until I was consumed by it. He set a rhythm that was perfect, deep and steady, his hands gripping my hips as he moved within me. I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him deeper, matching his rhythm with my own. The couch creaked beneath us, but I didn't care. Nothing existed except the feeling of him inside me, the way he filled me completely, the way our bodies moved together, like they'd been designed for this. "You feel incredible," he groaned, his voice strained with control. I could only respond with breathless gasps, my nails digging into his shoulders as the pressure built inside me, coiling tighter and tighter until I thought I might shatter. When his thumb found that sensitive bundle of nerves where we were joined, the sensation pushed me over the edge. My release crashed over me in waves, my body clenching around him as I cried out his name. He followed moments later, his body tensing as he buried himself deep inside me, his own release shuddering through him. Afterward, we lay tangled together, on the narrow couch, our breathing slowly returning to normal. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder, while I listened to the steady beat of his heart beneath my cheek. The brewery around us was quiet, the only sound our synchronized breathing and the distant hum of refrigeration units. I started, then trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Unexpected?" he suggested, his voice warm with amusement. I lifted my head to look at him. I was going to say perfect. His smile was soft, genuine. It was, wasn't it? We stayed like that for a while, neither of us wanting to break the spell. But eventually, reality began to creep back in. I had a hotel room to get back to, an article to write, a life waiting for me in another city, and he had a brewery to run, responsibilities that went beyond this stolen moment. "I should probably go," I said reluctantly, though every part of me wanted to stay. He nodded, understanding, but his arms tightened around me for just a moment longer. "Probably, but I don't want you to." The honesty in his voice made my heart skip. "I don't want to either." We dressed slowly, stealing kisses and touches, prolonging the inevitable. When I was finally ready to leave, he walked me to the front door of the brewery, his hand warm on the small of my back. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his thumb brushing across my bottom lip. It was a question I'd been dreading, because I didn't know the answer. My life was in another state. My work took me all over the country. But looking at him now, at the hope in his eyes, I couldn't bring myself to say no. "I'd like that," I said instead, and meant it. He kissed me one more time, soft and lingering, before I forced myself to walk away. But even as I climbed into my rental car, I could feel him watching me, and I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, I sat in my hotel room with my laptop open, trying to write about the brewery tour. But every time I started typing about the beer, my mind wandered to Xavier's hands, to the way he'd looked at me, to the way he'd made me feel. Professional objectivity had never been so difficult to maintain. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "Hope you slept well, already missing you." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Barely slept at all. Kept thinking about last night." His reply came quickly. "Good. Means it was as real for you as it was for me. Real." That was exactly what it had been. Real in a way that nothing in my life had been for months. I'd spent so long going through the motions, writing about places and experiences without really connecting to any of them. But with Xavier, I'd felt something authentic, something that made me want to abandon all my careful plans and see where this could lead. Over the next few days, we texted constantly. He sent me pictures of new brews he was working on, asked about my writing, shared stories about growing up in Milwaukee. I found myself looking forward to his messages more than anything else, checking my phone obsessively, smiling at nothing, when his name appeared on my screen. "I have a proposition," he texted on my last day in town. "I'm listening. Stay. Not forever, but longer. See what happens between us." My finger hovered over the keyboard. Stay. The word held so much possibility, so much risk. I had assignments waiting, deadlines to meet, a carefully planned career trajectory that didn't include getting derailed by a brewery owner in Milwaukee. But I also had something I'd never expected to find, a connection that felt worth exploring. "Can't just abandon my work," I typed back. Who said anything about abandoning it? Milwaukee has plenty of stories to tell, and I have plenty of reasons to keep you interested. The suggestion was tempting, more than tempting. I'd been a freelancer long enough to work from anywhere, and the truth was, I'd been feeling restless lately, unsatisfied with the constant traveling, the surface-level connections, the way my life had become a series of temporary stops rather than a real journey. "Let me think about it," I replied, but even as I typed the words, I was already making my decision. That evening, I found myself back at the brewery, ostensibly to say goodbye, but really because I couldn't stay away. Xavier was behind the bar, serving the evening crowd, but when he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made my chest tight. "Thought you might come back," he said, sliding me a beer without being asked. "Just saying goodbye," I said, but we both knew it wasn't true. As the evening wore on, the crowd thinned out until it was just a few regulars and us. Xavier closed up while I waited, and when the last customer left, he turned to me with that look I was beginning to recognize, the one that made my pulse quicken and my knees weak. "So," he said, moving closer, "have you thought about my proposition?" "I have," I said, reaching up to touch his face. "And I think you might be right about Milwaukee having stories to tell." His smile was brilliant. "Does that mean you're staying?" Instead of answering with words, I kissed him, pouring all my uncertainty and hope and growing feelings into that single connection. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I finally gave him my answer. "I'm staying." This time, when he carried me to his office, it felt different. Less desperate, more deliberate. We took our time undressing each other, savoring each revealed inch of skin, each soft gasp and quiet moan. When he laid me down on the couch again, his touch was reverent, worshipful, like he was memorizing every detail. "I want to taste every inch of you," he whispered against my throat, and proceeded to do exactly that. His mouth mapped my body with exquisite attention, finding sensitive spots I didn't know I had, building my arousal so slowly and thoroughly that by the time he finally settled between my thighs, I was already trembling with need. When his tongue found my core, I arched off the couch, my hands fisting in his hair. He took his time, alternating between gentle licks and firm pressure, reading my body's responses like a master craftsman perfecting his technique. When he slid, 2 fingers inside me while his mouth continued its work, I nearly screamed with the intensity of it. The dual sensations were overwhelming, building pressure that threatened to consume me entirely. "Let go," he murmured against me. "I want to feel you come apart," and I did. The release hit me like a tsunami, waves of pleasure crashing over me so intensely that I saw stars. My body convulsed around his fingers as he worked me through it, his mouth gentling but never stopping until every last tremor had passed. When I finally came back to myself, he was kissing his way up my body, his own need evident in the tension of his muscles, the strain in his breathing. I reached for him, wrapping my hand around his length, marveling at the size and heat of him. "I need you," I whispered, guiding him to where I ached for him. He entered me in one smooth thrust, both of us groaning at the sensation. This time there was no tentative exploration, no careful adjustment. We moved together with an urgency born of deeper understanding, of growing connection that went beyond the physical. He set a pace that was both demanding and perfect, his body claiming mine in ways that left me breathless. I met each thrust with equal fervor, our bodies finding a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. The sound of skin against skin filled the small room, punctuated by our gasps and moans and whispered endearments. When he shifted our position, pulling me on top of him, I took control with a confidence that surprised us both. I rode him with abandon, my hands braced on his chest, my head thrown back as I chased the building pleasure. His hands gripped my hips, guiding my movements, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're so beautiful like this," he groaned, his voice strained. "So perfect." The words pushed me closer to the edge, but it was the look in his eyes, intense, possessive, but also tender, that finally sent me over. My second release was even more powerful than the first, my body clenching around him as I cried out his name. He followed immediately, his hips bucking up into me as he found his own completion, his hands pulling me down for a kiss that was more breath than actual contact. Afterward, we lay entwined on the narrow couch, sticky with sweat and satisfaction, neither of us wanting to move. This time, the silence between us felt different, not awkward or uncertain, but comfortable, complete. "So," Xavier said eventually, his fingers combing through my hair, "what's the first Milwaukee story you're going to write?" I smiled against his chest. I was thinking something about local craftsmanship, the passion that goes into creating something special, the way the right ingredients can create magic when they come together. "Sounds like you've got your angle figured out." "I do," I said, lifting my head to look at him. "But I think it might take extensive research, long-term observation, really getting to know the subject." His smile was lazy, satisfied. "I like the sound of that kind of research." "Good," I said, settling back against him. "Because I have a feeling this story is going to take a while to tell properly." 3 months later, I was still in Milwaukee, still researching. My article about the brewery had been published and well received, but it had led to other assignments, other stories about the city's food and drink scene. Xavier had been right. Milwaukee had plenty of stories to tell, and I was finding new ones every day. But the best story was the one we were writing together, one day at a time, one shared moment at a time. It wasn't always easy. I still traveled, sometimes for work, and he had busy seasons at the brewery that left little time for romance. But what we'd found that first night had only grown stronger, deepened into something that felt solid, real, permanent. Standing in his apartment on a lazy Sunday morning, wearing nothing but one of his t-shirts while he made coffee, I couldn't help but smile at how much my life had changed. I'd come to Milwaukee looking for a story and found something better. I'd found home. Some people say you should never make major life decisions based on one night of passion. But sometimes one night is all it takes to show you what you've been missing, what you really want, what might be worth changing everything for. Have you ever had a moment that completely altered your path? What would you have done in my place? Stayed, safe, or taken the leap? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if stories like this get your heart racing, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until next time, keep following your instincts. They might just lead you somewhere amazing.